Do the video with promoted classes.
Now do it with
Next
promoted
do it with
classes.
Now
Do
do
it
it
with
with
promoted
classes.
Next
promoted.
Okay, I'll make the video.
I recently made a tournament video to pit all of the standard base classes in GBA Fire Emblem against each other, and one or two people watched it. And now we're going to do the same thing for the promoted classes. The basic premise is the same. I'll be taking all 20 basic promoted classes in FE8 and making them fight every other class to rank them by the number of wins, but I have tweaked the system. In the last tournament, you had the class being tested attack first, and they would get 1 point if they beat the other class, or 0 points if they lost. This scoring didn't take into effect whether they would win if they were to attack second, so for the sake of thoroughness we will now be considering both sides of the scenario. The class being tested will get half a point if they win when attacking first, and half a point if they win when they attack second. So a really strong class might get a full point in some matches, but if the match is only decided by who attacks first, then they will only get half a point, which more accurately represents the strength difference between classes better than the old system did. So just to make it clear, if we're testing the Ranger and he's up against the Sniper for example, if the Ranger wins both battles, he gets a full point. If he loses both battles, he gets 0 points. If he wins when he attacks first but loses when he attacks second, then he only gets half a point. And in some instances the RNG might mean that he could lose when he attacks first and win when he attacks second, which would also be half a point. The other thing I changed is upgrading everyone's weapons. In the first tournament we had iron weapons on everybody, which worked really well for the unpromoted units, but when I tested iron weapons on the promoted classes, it was really difficult for anyone to deal much damage and it ended up as a real grind. So I decided to upgrade the physical weapons to silver, which makes more sense with promoted classes since the late game where you would be seeing promoted enemies will typically give them good equipment like silver weapons, and the higher damage output lets the fights flow more naturally. The only sticking point I had was for the magic classes, because the equivalent A rank tomes suck. For some reason the silver weapons are both stronger and lighter than their iron counterparts, but A rank tomes are way heavier than the base rank tomes, so giving the magic classes these tomes actually slowed them down so much that it really screwed them over. So instead I gave them tomes that better suited them in combat, so anima users had thunder, light users had shine, and dark users had the basic flux, since the only other options were Nosferatu and Luna, which would have been massively busted. It's really tricky to balance the physical and magical weapons, and unfortunately there's no perfect solution. This is the best that I could really do. Everything else in the tournament is the same. All the units are level 20 with each weapon type they can wield in their inventory. In the base classes this only really applied to the Cavalier, but most classes gain an additional weapon upon promotion, so this should make things more interesting. Also, I will be using the weapon ranks and stats from the Sacred Stones just to keep things simpler. I won't be adding an axe rank to Paladins for example, so just bear in mind that in FE6 and 7 they would be better for this reason. And finally, we will only be using the basic vanilla classes, so that's no Necromancers, monster classes or Manicheats or anything like that. And feel free to comment which class you think will win. So after hours of testing, we have the combat rankings for every promoted class, and in 20th position we have the Bishop with a score of 1. Since there are 20 classes, the score will be out of a maximum of 19, and 1 out of 19 is pretty abysmal. The Monk didn't do too well in the unpromoted tournament, but for the promoted version the Bishop has gone all the way down to bottom place, with half a point for beating the Rogue when attacking first and half a point for beating the Assassin when attacking first. Enemy Bishops are in a really tough spot in GBA, having really bad stats and being locked to light magic, which is the worst magic type stat wise. Obviously playable bishops aren't always bad, their personal bases can make up for the class's low bases, and especially in FE8 they're amazing as playable units because of how great Slayer is. As an enemy class testing combat in a vacuum, they performed incredibly poorly here. Next we have a tie for the 18th and 19th places between the Rogue and the Assassin with a score of 2 points. I don't think them scoring so low is a big surprise to anyone really, especially for people that saw the first tournament video where the Thieves didn't win a single match, and promoting a Thief to either Rogue or Assassin doesn't exactly give them the best promo bonuses. Rogues are meant to be a utility class, with Assassin being the supposed combat option for the Thief promotions, but in terms of stats they are almost identical. Their skills are obviously different, but pick doesn't help the Rogue in combat, and I didn't actually see the Silencer proc a single time in these tests. You'd think you'd get at least one Silencer in the 38 battles the Assassin fought, but the way Silencer works is based on critical hits. Any critical hit will have a 50% chance to proc Silencer silencer, but the crit rates were really low for the assassin the whole way through. Having pretty high speed meant that they were relatively dodgy, but in the vast majority of matches this couldn't compensate for their low damage and awful bulk. The few battles they did win were down to getting 1 or 2 clutch dodges against the Bishop and the Valkyrie, and the only class locked to axe is the Berserker. At the 17th spot we have the Falcon Knight with 5 points. Once again, not a massive surprise, the Pegasus Knight didn't do very well in the unpromoted tournament and nothing has really changed here. They won both battles against the Rogue, Assassin and Bishop, which isn't much of a brag, and they also won both battles against the Valkyrie, which I guess is slightly more impressive. Overall their performance was pretty lackluster against the magic units and even worse against most physical units. Even with weapon triangle advantage against the Berserker, they still got absolutely steamrolled, and against the 3 classes that can wield bows, the Falcon Knight never stood a chance. In 16th place we have the Valkyrie with a score of 6.5. In a very similar boat to the Bishop, being locked to the lower might light that's an absolute tongue twister. Locked to the lower might light magic, the Valkyrie is in a tough position, but their stats are more serviceable, so they did manage to get 5.5 more points than the Bishop did. The key difference here is a much higher speed stat as well as a better magic stat as well. It was only against a few of the slower enemies that the Valkyrie was able to double, but it did help them out in certain matchups like the Summoner and the Sniper, where the Valkyrie did win both matches. She also won both battles against the Ranger, which I was pleasantly surprised by, although her most impressive accomplishment in my opinion was getting half a point against the Wyvern Knight, which I really didn't see coming. The 15th and 16th spots are a tie between the Sniper and the Summoner with 7 points apiece. Besides the 2 classes locked to light magic, the Summoner is the lowest scoring out of the magic classes, which seems logical since Summoner is meant to be more of a utility class, with Druid being the more combat focused of the 2 Shaman promotion options. Summoning can be an amazingly helpful mechanic to have, but in a pure combat test like this, the Summoner struggles, especially when it comes to their really low speed. Sniper is the lowest scoring of the 3 classes with bow access, and they're also the only one of those classes that doesn't have access to another weapon type. Being locked to 2 range and also having very shaky speed meant that the Sniper did struggle, and while his unique skill Sure Shot activated really frequently, it didn't really help since Sure Shot doesn't deal any additional damage. He did have his moment to shine though, winning 5 of the 6 battles against the 3 flying classes, and watching him 1 or 2 shot these units was very satisfying. In 14th place we have the Paladin with 9 points. This is actually way lower than I was expecting. I think this is quite a big upset. In the unpromoted video, Cavalier did really well. I believe they were in the top 5 in that video, but with promoted classes, the Cavalier just didn't perform as well as I expected. The Cavalier was the only unpromoted class to have a choice of weapons, which gave it an edge, but after everyone has promoted, the Cavalier has lost the advantage it had over the other classes. In a pure combat-based context like this, the other promotion option, Great Knight, is far superior in terms of stats, and it also gains axes on promotion, which really helped it in the match against the Paladin. Like many other classes, the Paladin also has very shaky speed, so it did end up getting doubled by quite a few of the classes, which really made him miss out on quite a few potential wins. In the end, its stats just weren't enough to bring its score up any higher, which is a shame. And with only half a point more, in the 12th spot we have the Great Knight. Comparing this to the Paladin, he does have significantly higher strength and defense, and all the rest of their stats are basically identical, but even with the higher strength and defense plus access to axes, he still didn't score significantly different to the Paladin, which is quite interesting. I think both of these classes had a rough time with some of the magic classes, and even with greater control of the weapon triangle, they still seem to get outclassed by many of the physical enemies. The Berserker matchup here is a perfect example of this, with the Great Knight having weapon triangle advantage but still facing fairly high hit rates and getting doubled as well, which is just too much for him to overcome. The doubling from a lot of the enemies was less of a surprise here since Great Knights are traditionally a slow unit, but it did seem to be a real issue for both them and the Paladin. In 11th place we have the Sage with 10 points. Sage did pretty well. The 1-2 range definitely helped him to get a lot of wins when he attacked first. Unfortunately, a lot of the matchups were close enough to be decided by who attacked first, and he lost the second battle in a lot of the matchups. I really enjoyed this battle where he one-shots the Berserker with a shine crit. That was definitely a highlight. Sage is yet another slow class, and he did get doubled by quite a few of the enemies, including the other class that a mage could promote into, the Mage Knight. Sage is a good class, it's got a lot going for it, but not enough to get it into the top 10. The 10th spot goes to the General with a score of 10.5. In terms of stats, the General is very comparable to the Great Knight, and he performed very similarly in the matches, with one main difference: the General has Great Shield. In the main campaign, Great Shield doesn't come up too often, it's not the most impactful skill, but in this tournament, Great Shield was amazing and actually won several battles. Battles like this one against the Sage, where the general is getting doubled and should have died very quickly. His Great Shield activations kept him alive long enough to win the battle, but it did make for some very grindy battles like this matchup against the hero, where Great Shield activated a bunch of times, even against a crit, which is wild, and he managed to get a win against him, but only when he attacked first. He couldn't achieve the victory twice. Spots 8 and 9 are a tie between the Berserker and the Warrior with 11 points each. This is another case of the two promotion options for a class performing very similarly, in this case the promotions for the fighter class. The main thing going for the Warrior over the Berserker is his access to bows, and he did win all 6 of the battles against the 3 flying classes, but the Berserker actually won 5 of those 6 matches even without a bow rank. And the main thing Berserker gets over the Warrior is the critical boost, which actually came up quite a lot, which was really fun to see. When these two classes fought each other, they got 1 win each, and the Berserker did get his win with a crit, which was very fitting. The 6th and 7th places were also a tie, this time between the Swordmaster and the Ranger with 12 points apiece. The Swordmaster was actually very good at winning battles even when he attacked second, mainly because of the critical boost allowing him to end battles quickly. Obviously high speed for doubling and a lot of crits is a very good combination, and it allowed the Swordmaster to get quite a lot of wins. Several battles would have been a loss if it hadn't been for a clutch crit. The Ranger is also fairly speedy, and the high speed let him get a lot of wins by doubling quite a few of the enemies, and the bow access helped him as well against the flying classes. When they fought each other, the Ranger won one fight and the Swordmaster won the other with a very stylish crit. Getting into the top 5, we have the Wyvern Lord with a score of 12.5. Wyvern Lords have amazing strength and defense, and their speed isn't quite as tragic as a lot of the other classes we've seen so far. There was quite a lot of matches where the Wyvern Lord won both battles, but there was also several matches where he ended up being completely outclassed and lost both battles. He mainly had difficulty against the bow classes, which had effective damage, as well as against the stronger magic classes in the Mage Knight and the Druid, where their 1-2 range allowed them to outpace the Wyvern in terms of damage. Overall, it was a strong showing from the Wyvern Lord, but with the Wyvern Rider getting the first place in the unpromoted tournament, this is slightly lower than I maybe expected them to rank. At number 4, we have the Druid with 13 points. Again, going back to the unpromoted tournament, the Shaman placed in the top 3, so it's interesting to see the two promotion options for the Shaman do so differently here. The Druid is far superior to the Summoner in terms of combat, getting way better promotion bonuses as well as access to a second magic type, and somehow those differences were enough for the Druid to rank 10 places above the Summoner, which is a massive difference. Clearly the benchmarks that the Druid reaches in magic and speed were enough to impact a ton of the matches, and they only really struggled against a couple of the classes like the Hero and the Swordmaster where they were outmatched. The number 3 spot goes to the Wyvern Knight with a score of 13.5. This class just has a lot going for it, with good strength and defense, but also very good speed, allowing it to double a lot of enemy classes and dominate the vast majority of the matches. The bow wielding enemies still stole a lot of victories away from the Wyvern Knight due to their effective damage, but 13.5 is still a very strong score, especially for a unit with an inbuilt weakness against bows. Despite only having access to a single weapon type, it still outperformed the Wyvern Lord and won both battles in the matchup. The overall better performance was mainly just because of their speed stats, but a shout out does have to go to its skill Pierce. This skill has an activation chance on every attack equal to the user's level, so with maxed out units it had a 20% proc chance on every attack, which combined with high enough speed to double actually let Pierce get a couple of nice activations in the tournament. Second place goes to the Mage Knight with 14 points. Mage Knight is the highest scoring magic class in this tournament, and it's not a coincidence that it is also the magic class with the highest speed, with the exception of the Valkyrie, but the Mage Knight won that matchup anyway because of weapon triangle advantage. Against most classes, the combination of 1-2 range and doubling fairly reliably was just too much to work against, and the Mage Knight won both battles in a lot of the matchups, and they were only really outclassed against 3 of the classes, which were Hero, Wyvern Knight and Druid. Despite ranking higher than the Druid overall, when they fought it was the Druid that came out on top both times due to the weapon triangle advantage and the insanely high magic stat of the Druid, but it was still a very impressive performance for the Mage Knight overall. And that means the class we are left with to claim first place is the Hero, with an incredible score of 17.5. This difference of 2.5 points between the first and second place is higher than the difference between any other 2 spots on this list, which shows just how dominant the Hero really was. A score of 17.5 means that they only lost 3 of the 38 battles they fought, which is an incredible achievement. The battles that he did lose were interestingly a loss against the General when he attacked second, which was mainly just down to some outrageous Great Shield procs and both battles against the Wyvern Lord. But aside from those 2 losses, he won every other battle he fought, which is crazy. The hero has stats that are all around great, and with a Silver Axe he was able to have a very high damage output, which most classes struggled to compete against. Hero has always been a class I've loved, so even if I didn't necessarily think that they would come out on top, I was quite happy to see them claim the first place as the strongest class in GBA Fire Emblem. And the same as last time, the reward for winning the tournament is getting to kill a child, so I'm going to let the hero claim his prize. Beautiful. And so there we are, those are the results all wrapped up. Did you predict that the hero would win the tournament, or did you think another class would have gotten the win? Let me know in the comments down below. There's also some exciting news that I did put in a community message a while back, but for those of you who didn't see that, we now have a Discord for the channel. It's been really fun chatting to some of you guys over there. It already feels like way more of a community, so feel free to join us over there if you're interested. If you've made it this far, please show the video some love, and if you are new to the channel, please consider joining our community to see more Fire Emblem content like this. That's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.